Hello and welcome to the Indian Writers Forum in yet another episode of Writers Talk Politics. Today we have with us Hansda Sowvendra Shekhar. Sowvendra's book, The Adivasi Will Not Dance, has the distinction of being discussed in the Legislative Assembly, but not for very good news for him. The Chief Minister of the state, Raghubar Das, as well as the Parliamentary Affairs Minister, Souradeep Roy, they wanted Section 295 of the Indian Penal Code to be imposed on the book, basically meaning a ban on the book. Today we have with us Hansda, who will be discussing the case, but more specifically the book in question. Hansda, can you first tell us something about the case as it stands now?
I still remain suspended, and my book, I think it is still banned, and no final decision or anything of that sort has been communicated to me yet. So that is how it is now. I'm what you call it, in limbo.
There's an interesting piece of response that you gave to one of the journalists who might have called you, and I'm quoting. You said that you would like to respond to this by writing more, and you said you would return to, quote, my writing and hopefully my job, unquote. Now you are a medical
officer, yes, a doctor.
So you're a doctor. I understand the need to go back to both, but could you tell us something more about your profession? How does it affect your writing? Because in literature we've had, say, people like Shekhar or the poet William Carlos Williams, who were doctors and were also so devoted to writing.
Michael Crichton.
Maybe you'll know more.
Because I liked his Jurassic Park, that's why. Actually, yes, my work as a doctor influences my writing. Like in my novel, The Mysterious Ailment of Rupi Baske, it opens with a childbirth scene. Like the woman, she is pregnant and she goes into labor, and she is working in the field. She is, she is transplanting the paddy. And then, because of the bending and all, she goes into labor and she has a bearing down, and then she gives birth to her child there in the paddy field itself. So that knowledge of how it happened, or how the childbirth process it takes place, that I came to know from my work as a doctor. And in this collection of short stories, there are stories which are influenced by, I think this must be safe to say it now, from things which I have experienced. Like there is a story called Getting Even, where there are two doctors, a male doctor and a female doctor, who are examining two children. The boy has been accused of raping a girl, and the female doctor, she is examining the girl who has been raped or allegedly raped.
Right. So, but do these experiences that you might know from, if I may call that, the field, how do you translate that later in your writing, which is more or less a pretty contemplative act?
Actually, I try to imagine some things, but most of the time they are like reports. Like I remember writing the story, They Eat Meat. It was first published in Lalit magazine, which is published from Nepal. And at that time, the story was called Don't Mix With Them, They Eat Meat. And when this story was when I first wrote that story, it was more like a report, like what is happening on the ground. But later on, when we re-edited this story for inclusion in this collection, there was some imagination put in, like what could have happened. So it is not always fact. Yes, I'm influenced by facts, but in the end, I have to, imagine something.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that story, They Eat Meat, which for me was the favorite in this short story collection. Interestingly, it is of course set for our viewers. This is the story is set amidst the Gujarat riots of 2002, and you have this government official, who's
a central government official who has transferred from a more liberal place to a more sheltered place.
Hansda, my question to you about this specific story is, what really struck me in terms of the craft was your use of certain violent images, but very, very succinct and short sentences to give the information to those readers. And this is from the story where it says, where the climax has been built up, and we more or less know that the mob has not yet entered the colony of your protagonists. And you end that section by saying, that night, comma, the mob came, full stop. And that's how the section ends. How did you how did you represent, like when you thought of writing about violence, how could you think of writing it in such, say, like with very short sentences, with very little information, with hardly any adjectives?
Actually, and when I wrote that particular line, that night the mob came, I had nothing more to add to it in that particular line, because what happened after the mob came, it it needed a separate section for itself. So that is in the following paragraphs. So till then I only had that much to say, and that is why when I have nothing much to say in that portion, so why should I use more words? So that is why I use just that short line.
There's one thing that I wanted to ask you, since a lot of the characters in this story are embodiments of the people you know. These are also, I must say, not characters you usually find in Indian English short stories or fiction, or even poetry for that matter. But if we stick to prose, these are not people you'll meet in literature so much. Like, who did you have as models for your writing?
You mean writers?
Yeah.
I did not have any models as writers. I mean, when actually I started writing at the age of 15. I mean, before that I used to, as a child of 8, 9, 10 years old, I used to I heard fairy tales. I used to read those illustrated books, Puss in Boots, Cinderella. And I used to I used to rewrite those stories in my own words, and I used to draw pictures. And like you have in those illustrated children's books, you have the text on one side and the illustrations on the other side. What is that? Verso recto page. Okay. So I used to make illustrations and text, and then I used to staple those pages and make books. So that is how I started writing. In 1998, when I was 15 years old, I published my first short story in the Asian Age newspaper. So till then I did not really have any role model. I did read, okay, but I couldn't really take any inspiration from anyone. Like, we were doing Shakespeare then, theek hai, but of course I couldn't write a Shakespeare. I couldn't use that Shakespeare's language in a children's story. So it all came from within. And then I stopped for a long time, and then I published and started publishing stories in 2007. So even now, this story Basoji, it was published in Indian literature in 2007. So even at that time, I wrote from my own experience, like what I heard about women who are being branded as witches, and they are driven out of their families, out of their properties. So maybe I did not read that much, maybe, or
maybe there really is not too much of literature or such characters. So maybe
I did not read that much, or maybe I had enough information already that I could write about it. And there was this other story, Desire, Divination and Death, which was published in 2010, again in Indian literature. Here it is here it has been called Desire, Divination, Death. And this is something which I got from my family. My Pishi, she told me this story about a woman who is returning home with some food for her sick child, and then she meets this chota bachcha on the rasta, and the child, he begs for food. I am hungry, give me some food. Okay, and she just shoos him away because the food is supposed to be for her own child. And then when she reaches home, she sees that her child, he's dead. So I do not know who I could have turned to, in order to write this story. This story came from my family. the story, it came from, within us. So I had to develop the story.
What is interesting is that some of your characters, in fact, also are seen in conversation with each other. So sometimes even commenting on the story that we have just read or you have narrated as the writer. There's another interesting part in your book that really drew me to your book was the use of certain phonetic sounds that you directly sort of use in English. I understand that if I was reading it in other language, like say I can only read Bangla, so the Bangla of Mahashweta Devi will be very different from the Bangla of say a Sunil Gangopadhyay novel. So how do you take that as a challenge when you're writing it in English? Because I think in one place you mentioned, she said this in Malda Murshidabadi accented Bengali. And in other places you will actually have the phonetic sound directly. So how do you make those decisions when you're writing in English?
Actually, if I encounter a word which does not have an equivalent in the language which I am writing in, then I use it as it is. Like in the story They Eat Meat, there is this line called Jemon Des Temon Bhes. ठीक है? Panmuni Ji, she is being advised that she has to change according to the place she is in. When in Rome, do as Romans do. So that is Jemon Des Temon Bhes. I couldn't have found any other, though we have this equivalent like when you are in Rome, do as Romans do, but that does not really suit there. Yeah. So that is why I use the term Jemon Des Temon Bhes. In this story, where I mentioned Malda Murshidabad accented Bengali, that is getting even, I wanted to actually use that particular word. The thing is, I was not really very familiar with, I know, but I wasn't confident of using those words. So I just said Malda Murshidabad accented Bengali. Though I would have loved to use, maybe sometime later when I write newer stories or newer books about that particular place. So I might use those words.
Now, you're probably coming from some lit fest right now.
Yes.
Now in this other kind of life, because writers in India often, at least several writers that I've met or aspiring or are young, they often have like this kind of double life where they have where you have this life as a doctor and then you're not exactly hopping from lit fest to lit fest, but at least attending quite a few, which should happen. Have you ever felt as a writer, and I often find this troubling even when we write reports in our site, I often say, okay, who do I only call a writer and who do I call an Adivasi writer or who do I call a Dalit writer? Who do I, can I call someone a Brahmin writer? Do you feel that, what does this label really mean for you? Because
this label, I do not like this label because writer should be a writer. I'll tell you why. When people are protesting against my book, they were accusing me of having tarnished the image of my own community. How can an Adivasi writer write something like this about the Adivasis? I mean, when you are branded, when you are given a label, ठीक है? So there are certain, conventions that you're expected to follow. Like if you're writing about the negative aspects of your society, you're not supposed to show it. ठीक है? So that is like tying up a writer or any creative person. So there might be other writers who might be okay with being, having a label, Adivasi writer or any label, but I am not comfortable with it because I just want to be a writer, because who knows, tomorrow I might write a book about China where this concept of Adivasi might not be there, although there might be indigenous people. I'm not going into that, but the kind of division that we have here, maybe it's not there, or maybe I can write about a society where it is a genre where you do not have everything that you have in real life. You do not have where your world is not divided into communities, where your world is not, it does not have labels. ठीक है? So if I start writing about that, will you still call me an Adivasi writer? I don't think so. So why should we be labeled now?
That's very well answered, Sowvendra. When the controversy surrounding your book started, it was not just, say, the politicians. There was a section, say, outside of government, which also had an opinion against your book, and that's absolute. And as far as I remember, the Indian Writers Forum did bring out a statement saying that you can have problems with a book, but the debate around the book has to be in like the terms have to be civil on civil terms, and you cannot, attack a writer in the way at least you were attacked. What do you have to say about, especially when it comes to, say, indigenous people or writing or indigenous politics? Often there is always this imperative to have someone who is the right spokesperson for this thing. Do you think that that is also a very limiting?
Actually, this is where I want to revisit your question about labels. Just because we have labels, we have this concept of the right spokesperson or a particular hero who all can look up to, and that is exactly what I hate, because I never, I will never try to be a representative writer, because that in itself is so limiting. A writer should be independent. That's all I can say.
Hansda, on better topics now. Have
Yeah.
you been writing lately?
Yes,
what
I've been
have you
writing lately. I'm trying to put together a few short stories, and then I'll again do one more book. And there are two books, which one of which is complete and one of which is half done. So I have at least 4 books coming.
Great. That reminds me of this comment, by the way. Calvino writes in one of his non-fiction works, a collection of 4 non-fiction pieces, where after he's finished some 4-5 books, he says, I think I'll write, he looks at he remembers looking at his daughter and saying, I think I'll write 9 more. So I hope you carry on with the same zeal and commitment and love that you have for writing. Thank you very much for
Thank you
your
so much. And I thank the Indian Cultural Forum and everyone who stood by me during this time, and I do not know what else to say. That's it.
No, it's fine as long as you keep sending your stories to us so that we can publish them first before everyone else.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to this channel. We'll be putting the links to other interviews that we have done in this series with other people like Kiran Nagarkar, Nayantara Saigal, etc. in the description to this video. Please like and subscribe our channel. Thank you very much.